A really long time ago, maybe as far back as ancient Babylon, there was an old farmer. And this old farmer had an old donkey. This old donkey was getting kind of tired, getting more stubborn. And on the property where they worked, there was an old well that had gone dry and had been abandoned. It's part of the property that they didn't really go on very much, but for one day, the farmer couldn't find his old stubborn donkey. Started calling out for this donkey. And he heard a noise, and he was like, oh, it's coming from over there, the old abandoned well. So and this is a deep well. This is a very dry, arid area. He goes over there, and sure enough, there's his donkey at the bottom of the well. And he says, donkey, we're both old. I think it's time for you to go. I have no way to get you out of there. There's no tools. I don't have money to get a crew over here to send down a harness and lift you up with the right cranks and levers. I don't know about that stuff. The donkey looks up at him and is just kind of like, are you serious? Like, after all we've been through? So the farmer was like, this is awful, but I'm just gonna bury him. And the farmer starts shoveling dirt in to the tomb. Well, what would be the tomb. And when the dirt hits this donkey, the donkey does this. And all the dirt shakes and falls off. The farmer looks down. He's like, throw some more dirt in. The donkey shakes and the dirt falls off of him. And the farmer starts to realize, I think this donkey wants to live. And maybe the more dirt I put in there, the more dirt will end up underneath the donkey, and he'll be up here. So soon, other people in the area saw in the distance this farmer doing this weird thing, putting dirt into an empty well, and was like, all right, he's finally lost it. Let's go get him and help him. So they arrive, and then they all bring their shovels, and they're all helping put dirt in. This donkey's shaking vigorously, and the dirt keeps falling, and he keeps rising, keeps shaking. Dirt keeps falling, he keeps rising, till finally the dirt is pretty much level with the ground, and the donkey shakes one final time, looks around, and steps out of the hole. And something happened to that donkey in that experience. His joy for life returned in ways that were very unpredictable and profound. And up to that point, the donkey didn't have any descendants. But for some reason, he gets really frisky. And he begins to have many, many children. And he lives long enough to see his first grandchild, but not beyond that. And that, my friends, is about as true a story as a story can get. Now, before we delve into first century Jerusalem, I'd like to first venture into the deep south in the early 1960s. See, the power structures in the South had borrowed some tactics and control from the Roman Empire of Jesus' day. The power holders in the South knew how to crush any potential uprising or any hint of an uprising through intimidation, unfair laws, and uncompromising brutality. The ruling powers in the South, like the Roman Empire, held sham trials, tortured people, and hung them from trees in public displays intended to strike fear into their subjects and to demand submission. In spite of the many atrocities, In spite of the countless law enforcement jurisdictions led by violent bigots, there grew a thirst for justice and freedom in the bellies of the abused. And the Freedom Riders took on a bold initiative to integrate buses from Washington, D.C. through the South all the way to New Orleans. Say what? You want to go where? The Freedom Riders knew the risks and went anyway. They encountered beatings, imprisonment, and even an attempt to burn them alive inside one of their buses. That could not stop more civil rights activists, advocates, and allies from all over the country from hopping into cars or getting onto buses and heading throughout the Deep South. Young people, middle-class people, poor people, old people, they could not be forced to stay put and watch news coverage and complain. They had to do something. The freedom movement was underway. And they headed straight to the middle of the chaos. Now, with all the attention that the Freedom Rides brought with the increased involvement of whites and others from states outside of the South, the rise of hope within black folk and allies in the South, the moral fortitude and political will of the nation continued to sputter. But the movement continued with expanded efforts, education, and voting rights. And then, June 1964, near the town of Philadelphia, Mississippi. Say what? You want to go where? James Chaney, Mickey Schwerner, and Andrew Goodman were killed by members of a self-described Christian organization, the Ku Klux Klan. The three civil rights workers, Chaney, Schwerner, and Goodman, were investigating the burning of Mount Zion Methodist Church, what had been a site for CORE, a Congress of Racial Equality, Freedom School, and voter registration. And these efforts led to parishioners being beaten by Sheriff's Deputy Cecil Price and other bigots who stopped their caravan and forced deacons of the church to kneel in the headlights of their own cars and were beaten with rifle butts. That same group of assailants was identified as being the ones who burned the church in the first place. Deputy Sheriff Price is the one who arrested Chaney, Schwerner, and Goodman for an alleged traffic violation and took them to the Neshoba County Jail. And the three were released that evening into the darkness, not being allowed to make a phone call or any sort of plans or anything. And on the way back to Meridian, Mississippi, they were stopped on Highway 19 by patrol lights and 2 carloads of Klan members. The 3 civil rights leaders like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were about to be thrown into a fiery furnace. The 3 were taken by car to another remote rural road. The kidnappers shot and killed Schwerner, then Goodman, and first chain-whipped Chaney before shooting him. Then Deputy Sheriff Price and the others buried the young men in an earthen dam nearby. Unlike Daniel's friends of long ago times, the 3 did not emerge from the flames with their bodies intact, but their spirits, their souls, their essence could not be consumed. The FBI was sent to investigate, and the missing civil rights workers became a major national story, especially on top of these events as they were growing across the Deep South. The men's bodies remained undiscovered for 44 days. A witness to the 44-day search stated that several other bodies were found before the 3 civil rights workers were found. But none of those discovered bodies made the headlines because they were all black bodies. Mickey Schwerner's widow, Rita, who also worked for CORE, expressed indignation that the press had ignored previous murders and disappearances of blacks in the areas, but highlighted this case because 2 white men from New York had gone missing, one being her husband. She said she believed that if Cheney were the only one missing, the case would have not received much attention. It's been said that this atrocity, the murder of Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman, was one of the many tipping points in our national consciousness. And somehow it seems it takes the shedding of innocent blood to wake us up, unless the shedding of innocent blood is drawn by assault rifles on school campuses. Back to first century Jerusalem. Historians tell us that there were other Jewish movement leaders, other Messiah figures before Jesus, and for the most part, those uppity leaders were killed by the Roman occupiers. The Romans, like those in the Deep South, had become efficient at recognizing potential troublemakers and had become accustomed to going through the motions to prop up the facade of justice. Jesus knew all this as he stood on a hill overlooking the city of Jerusalem. And Jesus gave instructions on where to find the donkey. While Jesus waited, I imagine that he, Jesus, pondered taking a road that didn't lead to Jerusalem. Maybe one road would lead to leisure time and comfort. Maybe another road would lead to the presidency of the local chapter of Carpenters United. Maybe the road over there would lead to long-term financial security and a house of his own. Now, in my version of this story, when the donkey arrives, he, the colt, is the descendant of the farmer's old donkey. And this donkey grew up hearing the legends of his ancestor, this great-great-great-great-grandpa who defied death and was born again into a new life. And his grandparent story was in his ears constantly, and he too felt a calling beyond his horizon. And when the donkey sees Jesus, he knows in his guts that that time had come. You see, Jesus is one of the first and maybe the OG freedom rider. He hopped on that colt, that donkey, and took the most direct route to Jerusalem. And once Jesus gets to Jerusalem, he doesn't lay low. He makes exactly the kind of fuss that would be noticed, no matter the likely consequences. Because Jesus knew that the movement towards inclusion, acceptance, a movement that was determined to tear down the walls that separate us by class, race, religion, gender, and sexual orientation, had to come down. And if he didn't step into that fray, he couldn't expect anyone else to. Jesus had a sense of what was possible and had to travel as far down the road towards liberation as he could, to share the news of a loving, living, and liberative God, no matter the consequences. Right on, Jesus. Show us the way. God, my prayer this morning is when we hear the question, say what? You want to go where? May we, your people in this day and age, may we, your people who thirst for justice, may we, your people who know our hope is not in vain, may we, your people, muster the courage to hop on and ride. Amen.